He was 77 when Peter Capaldi finally allowed a sentence to escape him. Slowly, deliberately, as if it had waited decades for permission to exist. Not spoken in anger, not whispered in regret, but delivered with the calm weight of a man who had learned the cost of silence. There are 5 people I will never forgive. The room was quiet, the kind of quiet that does not comfort, but listens. Light fell gently across his face, tracing the lines left by years of intensity, discipline, and restraint. For most of his life, Capaldi had mastered words, shaping them, bending them, commanding entire rooms with nothing but his voice. Yet this sentence felt different. He did not perform it. He released it. To the public, Peter Capaldi has always embodied authority and intelligence, a presence sharp enough to cut through chaos, a man whose characters stood tall, defiant, unbreakable. But behind that composure lived another truth, one made of withheld trust, unspoken disappointments, and relationships that fractured quietly without witnesses. At 77, forgiveness is no longer about reconciliation. It is about truth, about naming what time failed to erase, about acknowledging that some wounds do not bleed. They simply remain. Capaldi did not explain. He did not justify. He only counted. 5 people. 5 moments where something essential was lost. And once spoken aloud, those names would no longer belong to silence. Long before the stages, the cameras, and the sharp intelligence the world came to admire, there was a boy growing up in Glasgow, quiet, observant, and already learning the discipline of restraint. Peter Capaldi was born into a working-class Catholic family, in a city where voices were loud but emotions were rarely spoken. His childhood was not marked by dramatic tragedy, but by something more subtle and lasting. Distance. Affection existed, yet it was measured. Praise was rare. Expectations were silent, but heavy. As a boy, he learned early that expression required control. That emotion, if left unguarded, could become weakness. He spent hours listening rather than speaking, absorbing tones, gestures, contradictions, a radio murmuring in the background, gray streets soaked with rain, faces that revealed little, even when they felt deeply. One absence shaped him more than the others. The sudden death of his father when Peter was still young fractured something essential. There was no grand farewell, no final conversation, only a silence that settled into the household and never truly left. Grief was endured, not discussed. Pain was folded inward. It was there, in that early loss, that Capaldi learned to compartmentalize, to continue without resolution, to carry unanswered questions as part of daily life. Creativity became refuge, drawing, writing, observing people from a distance. He did not chase attention, he studied it, and slowly a protective instinct formed, a reluctance to rely too heavily on anyone, a tendency to keep parts of himself unreachable. The roots of unforgiveness do not always grow from betrayal. Sometimes they begin with absence, with things that end too soon and never explain themselves. And from that quiet foundation, he began to build a future, unaware of how often trust would be tested again. Success did not arrive suddenly for Peter Capaldi. It approached slowly, cautiously, as if testing whether he could endure it. In his early years, recognition came in fragments, small roles, supporting characters, faces remembered more than names. While others chased visibility, Capaldi sharpened something else: precision. He treated every role as an exercise in control, every line as a tool to reveal power without excess. Directors noticed, audiences sensed it, even before they could name it. Then came the moment when the industry finally turned its head. The intensity that once felt unsettling became magnetic. His performances carried authority, intellect, and a quiet menace that lingered long after scenes ended. He was no longer simply acting, he was commanding space. With visibility came validation. Awards followed. Invitations multiplied. The rooms grew brighter, louder, more crowded. Applause became routine. Cameras waited for his reactions. His voice, once trained in restraint, now carried influence. And yet beneath the success, something remained untouched by celebration. Capaldi smiled easily in public. He spoke with wit, clarity, confidence. But behind closed doors, he guarded himself carefully. Trust did not expand with fame. It narrowed. The higher he rose, the more selective his circle became. Not out of arrogance, but instinct. The industry demanded openness, loyalty, availability. It rewarded those who shared freely and punished those who hesitated. Capaldi complied professionally, but emotionally he stayed measured. He had learned too early that closeness could disappear without warning. There were early signs, conversations that shifted tone when success arrived, admiration that turned conditional, relationships that felt supportive only as long as he remained useful. The applause was real, wow, but not all intentions were. Still, he pushed forward. He refined his craft. He chose complexity over comfort. And when he stepped into roles that defined eras, he did so with the calm of a man who understood responsibility better than illusion. Fame did not corrupt him, it revealed others. By the time his name became undeniable, the fractures were already forming. Invisible to the audience, undeniable to him. The higher the light, the longer the shadows grew behind it. He had everything he once worked for, but trust quietly was becoming more expensive than success. And it was only a matter of time before the first rupture would break the illusion completely. The first rupture did not arrive with noise. It arrived quietly and disguised as routine, wrapped in politeness. A promise was postponed. A loyalty hesitated. A door that once opened easily began to close without explanation. Capaldi felt it before he understood it. The atmosphere changed. Conversations shortened. Eyes avoided his. It was not a single betrayal, but a realization. Success had altered the balance. People who once stood beside him now stood slightly behind, calculating, waiting, reassessing. Trust became conditional. Support became strategic. There was a moment he remembered clearly, a meeting that ended too early, a phone that did not ring again, an agreement dissolved without confrontation. No accusations were made, no apologies offered. Silence did the work. That was when something hardened inside him. He did not lash out. He did not demand answers. Instead, he withdrew, calmly, decisively. He learned that betrayal rarely announces itself. It simply leaves you alone in a room you once shared. From that point on, forgiveness stopped being instinctive. It became selective. Capaldi began to measure people not by what they said, but by what they did when nothing was at stake. Each rupture added weight, not anger, awareness. The understanding that loyalty, once broken, does not fully return, that some disappointments do not deserve confrontation, only distance. He continued to work, continued to succeed. But something fundamental shifted. The illusion of collective purpose faded. What remained was clarity. And within that clarity, names began to form. Not spoken, not written, but remembered. 5 faces, slowly emerging from the quiet. 5 people whose actions would never fully fade. 5 names, 5 wounds. 5 moments when trust crossed a line and never found its way back. Peter Capaldi never spoke them aloud in one breath. He carried them separately, each attached to a different chapter of his life, each leaving a distinct mark. The first was someone he once loved without calculation, a relationship built in the fragile years before certainty, when ambition had not yet hardened into caution. Promises were made easily then, futures imagined generously. But when commitment demanded patience instead of excitement, loyalty faltered. What hurt was not the ending, but the speed with which devotion was replaced by convenience. From that moment, Capaldi learned that affection, when tested, often reveals its limits. The second came from within his profession, a collaborator, a peer, someone who shared his language, his discipline, his hunger for excellence. Together, they built something meaningful, or so he believed. But recognition shifted the dynamic. Credit was redirected, narratives rewritten. When success arrived, it chose a side. Capaldi watched quietly as trust was exchanged for advantage. He never confronted it. He simply remembered. The third cut deeper because it came from blood rather than choice. A family relationship strained not by malice, but by expectation. Silence accumulated over years. Unspoken resentments became permanent distances. He understood the reasons. He even forgave the intentions. But forgiveness does not always repair what time erodes. Some bonds weaken not through betrayal, but through neglect. And neglect leaves its own scars. The fourth was not a person, but a system. The public gaze, the industry, the machinery that builds admiration and dismantles it without warning. Capaldi had given it honesty, discipline, decades of work. In return, it offered conditional loyalty, praise when convenient, distance when risk appeared. He did not resent criticism, he resented abandonment. The moment when integrity mattered more than popularity, the silence was deafening. And then there was the fifth, the most difficult to face, the one he avoided naming for years. It was himself, the man who stayed silent too long, who tolerated compromises in the name of professionalism, who mistook endurance for strength. Capaldi understood painfully that some wounds persist because they were allowed to, that boundaries drawn too late still cost something. He forgave others more easily than he forgave his own hesitation. At 77, clarity arrives without drama. He does not carry bitterness, he carries recognition. The understanding that forgiveness is not always an obligation. Sometimes it is a choice that comes too late to matter. 5 names, 5 lessons, and the quiet realization that the hardest pardon is the one we owe ourselves. In the late afternoon, when the light turns softer and shadows lengthen without urgency, Peter Capaldi sits with what remains. Not anger, not resentment, just memory, quiet, intact, undeniable. At 77, life no longer demands resolution. Some stories are allowed to stay unfinished, some names remain unspoken, not out of fear, but out of acceptance. He has learned that forgiveness is not a universal cure. Sometimes it heals, sometimes it erases truths that deserve to be remembered. Capaldi does not live trapped in the past. He lives aware of it. Each experience, each rupture, has shaped the discipline with which he loves, works, and listens. The silence that once protected him now feels different, lighter, more honest. There is a photograph on the table, a moment captured long ago. He studies it without nostalgia, without regret, only recognition, the understanding that survival is not about forgetting, but about caring less. 5 people marked his journey, but they do not define his ending. What defines him now is clarity, the courage to look back without softening the truth, and to move forward without demanding absolution. And as the room grows quieter, 2 questions remain unanswered, lingering gently in the air. Can a life truly be lived without forgiveness? Or is it sometimes the refusal to forgive that keeps us honest with who we are?